And a very warm welcome. You're joining us once again here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. And tonight we will be talking about Sri Lanka's economic recovery and whether Sri Lanka is on the path to emerge from crisis. The policy measures taken and the central bank's independence will be discussed tonight. And to discuss all this, we've invited to our studios none other than the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, the 17th Governor of CBSL, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weerasinghe, for taking the time, making time to be here amidst your busy schedule. But to begin with, I think we have much to talk about. The central bank is on the news. Parliament discusses the central bank as well. But when you took over, you spoke very much about the independence of the central bank. Do you have that independence?
Yeah, of course, in my view, the new act, this was approved by the Parliament last year, strengthened the independence of central bank in its operations. But even before, we had sufficient independence in the even previous act. There are some weaknesses, those were addressed in the new act. So now the institutional independence is now established, so that I can say this current independence and also accountability, not only independence, accountability is also strengthened. So earlier act did not have that kind of accountability and also that much of independence in implementing our key objectives. First one is price stability, second one is financial stability. I think now we have sufficient independence that I can firmly say we have sufficient independence. That act is a good one.
If you don't fall under the purview of any institution, who are you accountable for?
This is why we say in the act, we are accountable to the Parliament, we are accountable to the public in this country as a public institution. There are strong provisions in the new act. This is one of the reasons we at least once in 3 months, Parliament can call us, ask for explanation of our policies. We have commitment to the Parliament, to the public about inflation targets, a commitment to the country, to the Parliament of financial stability. We have commitment on the public debt management. All these things we are accountable. If something goes wrong, if we are not able to deliver our objective according to our mandate, according to legislation, then we should be accountable and Parliament can in time call us and ask for explanation, and we are ready to have this strong accountability to the public. And also we have certain requirements under the law. We have to mainly, if we deviate from the inflation target, we have to make announcement to the public, to the Parliament. We have to explain why that is a deviation, how we can bring it back, and all these accountability principles are much stronger now.
A recent statement made in Parliament by the opposition leader that the central bank is not under the Committee on Public Finance and it is under the government. We would like to seek your clarification on this.
I think under the new act, there is a provision central bank should be accountable and should be reporting to the Parliament. This was not there earlier. So as a result, there is no specific committee which has been given the mandate for the central bank to report, but we thought Committee of Public Finance is kind of a relevant subcommittee in the Parliament that activities of central bank can be monitored and can be reported. As a result, there was understanding by the Parliament, central bank. There are two committees. One is a Committee on Public Enterprises, because Sri Lanka is a public enterprise. So Auditor General has authority to audit central bank. So under those provisions, we had even earlier, as a public enterprise, we are reporting to the Parliament through Committee of Public Enterprises. But as a policy part, which is the monetary policy and system stability, although Committee on Public Finance is only for public finance matters, but there was understanding in the Parliament that for the policy matters, we should be reporting through Committee of Public. That's why if you see in recent interaction of the central bank, Committee on Public Finance has summoned us. We have been able to go there and explain on the policy side. But on the accountability side, on the accounts and all these things, this is Committee on Public Enterprise. There are two channels that we are reporting to the Parliament. In addition, there is a Committee on Banking Sector, this on the banking matter. There are several committees that we can be summoned by any committee. As a public institution, we should go and report.
talking about independence of the central bank, I think we cannot avoid discussing the salary hike, which has taken center stage even in Parliament. On several occasions, the International Monetary Fund mentioned, even at this last review, the importance of independence of central bank, and it was said that the monetary policy should continue prioritizing price stability, supported by sustained commitment to refrain from monetary financing and safeguard central bank independence. But with recent allegations and with the controversy surrounding the central bank's decision, can you assure of the independent status of the central bank will be safeguarded and that decisions will be taken in the best interest of the country?
I'm sure now people in the country have realized the importance of independent central bank. When you look at the central bank role in the economic recovery and stabilizing the economy in the last couple of years, I think it's very clear. We had a very clear role. We have been able to deliver that role because we exercised the independence that we had. As a result, there are clear benefits in terms of price stability, inflation, in terms of building up resource, in terms of stabilizing exchange rate, in terms of maintaining financial stability, preventing any banking crisis, and also in terms of our contribution to debt sustainability as a public debt aid management of the public debt of the government. So all those fronts in our responsibilities have been able to clearly deliver what we are supposed to do with this independent central bank. Going forward, I think that as a result, I think now there are some, in my understanding, there is a broader public support for independence. And that's why even if you look at some statement made in the Parliament, it's just clearly recognized central bank should be independent. That I appreciate and value that. And hope people in this country also value that independence. But there was a controversy because of the salary hike. I think to me, those are two different things. Salary issue of the central bank staff is an internal matter. That is, as the head of the central bank, board of the central bank governing board, our moral responsibility, there are twofold. One is our moral responsibility for the country is there in terms of policies. As I said, maintaining inflation, balance and stability, those are the moral responsibility for the country to recover the economy, stabilize the economy. But as the head of the institution, as a board of the central bank, we have moral responsibility for our staff, to look after our staff and address their concerns, grievances, and support the staff, those who have been working very hardly, and they have made a lot of contributions to contribute their contributions to recover the economy. So those are two different things. And why central bank has been given financial independence, also to preserve independence and prevent any undue influence in terms of influencing financially to the central bank. That's why central bank has been given by the law independence, financial independence, to determine their salaries and wages and benefits of the central bank staff. This is not something new. Last 70 years, and even under the previous Central Banking Act, since I joined the bank in the last 3 decades, once in every 3 years, central bank has been increasing salaries compared to the banking sector or market. That has been happening once in every 3 years in the last 30 years. This is not something new that as a government I did. This has been happening all throughout the period, and in fact, there's a reality, there's understanding. Central bank employees, as a public institution, central bank has been paying much higher salaries than any other public institution in the last 30 years. It's something not new. In fact, the justification why this time there has been an increase by about 50% is that obviously there was a difficult period during the last several years. As the head of the institution, as a board who are looking after the staff, we have a responsibility to support our staff to the extent possible, maintain the same practices we have been having in the past. It's not nothing new. So this is where I think people who criticize this probably have not even ignored what happened in the past.
But Governor, they are also questioning the ethics, the ethical right of the top financial regulator of the country to enable a salary hike to the staff of the central bank when government has failed to give salary hikes to public servants by at least 20,000, given the current situation of the country.
I think in my view, when you come out of economic crisis, only way to recover from the crisis is to make income of people higher so that they will be able to face high inflation, the impact of economic crisis. This is one of the reasons why the social safety benefit, the Samudra was increased by almost 3 times the expenditure was increased by the government. And the public sector salaries also increased to a certain extent, but this is not the first step. So if you look at any public institution since 2022 after the crisis, with the very high inflation, I think a lot of private institutions, a lot of state enterprises, to a certain extent they have been able to, and that's a good thing that they have been increasing, at least adjusting gradually the compensation salaries of the employees to the extent possible. But why the government has not been able to raise that much of compensate fully for inflation is mainly because government is an institution that rely on the tax revenues. Government can raise more taxes. I'm sure that I'm also of the view even public salaries should be increased more, because they can't afford to increase right now because of the not sufficient tax revenues. When the tax revenues are increasing, government should also be at the first instance, if they have capacity, they should be also increasing the salaries of the public servant to more extent. But in our case, it's a collective agreements once in 3 years, then only we fix for 3 years. But government can increase gradually based on their revenue collection. Even public institutions like in your institution, I'm sure all the public institutions or private institutions, to support their staff to a certain extent, to an extent possible, they have been supporting staff. If we take a position that because of the crisis we should not increase salaries of incomes any people, then we will never come out of this crisis. So in my position is that central bank would not depend on directly on a consolidated fund or the direct taxpayers fund. We are contributing to taxpayers in terms of paying dividends to the government. So to the extent given by the law that we have given independence, and also given the circumstances, if we are able to support our staff to a certain extent based on the earlier practices without violating what has been doing, I think we should be able to do every other institution. If that is possible, I think that should be done in my view.
Are you of the view again that this collective approach to increase salaries and empower the people with financing ability will really spur economic growth and activity in the country?
That's obvious. That's the basic principle of economics. So if you want to increase the economy to grow, people should be able to spend sufficiently for them to live. So that will create economic activities that will help increase incomes of other people as well. So that's why basic principle of economic recovery is to people to be able to earn higher incomes, improve their living standards so that they can spend more. That will help the economic recovery of the country. If you take a position, no one should increase salaries or incomes of these people, economy will stagnate. So to extent possible, if economy is recovering, certain sectors, for example, tourism sector, the tourism sector recovering, I think that's the best thing for tourism sector is to compensate, employ more people, pay them more so that sector can prosper. Prospering tourism sector means there will be benefits to other sectors. It is similar to any sector for banking sector. If bank sector is making profits, they should be able to compensate their employees so that they have a high living standard. So at least they can live, they can face a crisis, and that will have benefits to other sectors below effects. So this is how economic recovery process is happening, through increasing incomes of people, either social safety through poor and vulnerable, or public sector wage increases to the extent possible through the revenues, or out of the profits generated by state enterprises or private enterprises. If they make profits sufficiently, they should be able to share the benefits of those benefits to a certain extent with their employees, staff, so that's how economies are functioning.
Is government in a position to bear this burden of increased salaries at this current juncture?
Government has already, even with difficulty, we should appreciate government has able at least announced 10,000 rupees. Given the 1.5 million people employed by the government, it's not an easy thing for the government to do. If anyone is asking to pay more for the public servants, then someone should be also arguing they should be collecting more taxes also. It's not that printing money and paying high salaries is not going to work. That will make things worse. So paying more salaries, increasing salaries of the public sector should come from the much broader base, higher revenues for the government, so that then the benefit can be shared with the people, because a structural issue of the government in this country, state sector, is that it's a very large sector. When you have 1.5 million employed, Even increasing 10,000 is a huge amount. I think you can see the increase of salary bill, the 10,000 increase. But what I think going forward, to give the relief, government with the revenue increasing for the next year, I think I have seen the government has indicated next round of there can be a gradual increases every year with the increasing revenues. That has to happen.
However, last question on the salary issue. The Committee on Public Finance has recommended that the salary hike be suspended until next year, and that privileges given to central bank employees under the EPF be reconsidered. What are your thoughts on that? And there are also allegations about central bank making losses of 114 billion in 2023. Given this, there are questions whether the central bank can increase salaries.
On the first reporting, I think they're all misreporting. As far as I saw this report, we have not received formally yet. But I don't think what was reported today in the media is not correct. I don't think I need to respond to that. I think there will be accurate reporting. All I can say, because we are accountable to the Parliament, whether you agree or not, as a public institution, we certainly have a commitment to adopt the recommendations given by this independent review committee. So we will adopt that recommendation. It does not, to me, as far as I know, some of the reportings that suspend or EPF, sorry, those are not correct statements. Those are not correct, but I don't have time to give you, I mean, you will see the report. That's that part. I think we are committed as a public institutions to accept recommendation by the Parliament as a accountable public institution. We will implement once we get the report formally. That I can give that commitment. Whatever the recommendation, I don't think those are correct. So I mean, your question on the central bank has been making losses. So last year, 2022 and 2023 especially, the reason central bank made huge losses is because central bank agreed to restructure our holdings of public debt, a large amount, and as a result, we contributed to debt sustainability by over 700 billion rupees. So 2023, the loss is coming mainly from central bank, one-day loss that central bank reported in the balance sheet of close to 700 billion as a result of central bank restructured our treasury bill holdings, short-term bills, into 20-year, 30-year low-yielding treasury bonds. As a result, we made a loss. The loss is not a result of our inefficiency or bad management. It's because we made the biggest contribution to the domestic debt restructure, even more than the EPF made. We made 0.9% of gross financing need by the central bank. As a result, central bank balance sheet made a loss. But that is not a reason for the central bank not to give any salary hike or anything as an independent central bank. So central bank outcome of the balance sheet profit or loss, central bank is not an institution like any other institution. It's a unique institution which would not target making profit or preventing making losses. Our responsibility is to deliver price stability, financial stability, public management, other functions. When we deliver those functions, central banks, any other central bank in the world, can make losses or profits. This is an outcome of delivering policies. Central banks can make losses or profits. That's why last time the loss was mainly due to central bank contributed to the public debt, to reduce public debt, make public sustainable by 700 billion, the debt reduction for the government. That's why that was. That is not a result of bad performance. It's actually for good cause that we have made. But even in the past, there were years we have been making losses. But it's not a function of central bank performance. It's the outcome of the policies that we implement. For example, if we appreciate the currency by 10%, we are holding large amount of foreign reserves. Appreciation of currency means the value of those dollars in rupee terms come down. So in the balance sheet, that can be seen as loss. So appreciation of currency, if that is a bad thing for the country, that is the outcome of the right policies implemented. That's one of the reasons why there were kind of a losses. Central banks in some years. This is also one of the reasons, but major reason last year was the public debt management. But this is a main point is that central bank profits or losses. And also we do not rely on, we don't take money from conserve fund, we are making contributions to the taxpayers funds, conserve fund by whenever profits, we distribute that profits to the government. That's a benefit for the country.
Let's take, if you can take us through the debt restructuring numbers, Governor. You mentioned the contribution made by the central bank, even more than the EPF. But again, if you can talk about the numbers, because there are many parties talking about Sri Lanka's outstanding debt and debt restructuring, what it means for Sri Lanka. Of course, debt restructuring became a common man's term. Given the crisis, everyone talks about economics, finances. But if you can officially tell us what the numbers
I think when you think about, I have talked about this lot, I think if you think about in April 2022, when we had to announce the standstill or temporary suspension of making external debt service payment, we were in a situation where in the next coming 4-5 years, government had to repay external debt obligations to the tune of $6 billion in every 12 months for next 4-5 years. So when government has had the debt obligation $6 billion per year for next 4-5 years, and central bank had reserves for the country's all reserves, savings of foreign exchange, usable resource came down to $25 million. So when you have $25 million in your hand, and you have no obligation next 6 months, 6 billion, another 6 billion, then there's no other choice. So because we were too late to restructure debt, that was a position. There's no other choice. We had to start restructuring of external debt. That was the beginning of the debt restructure process. It's not only external debt. When you say we had large domestic debt stock as well. So the first point is that first objective is to get a relief from social balance of payment point, from the foreign exchange point of view, instead of paying $6 billion a year, which is not feasible, which was not feasible anyway because given the level of resource. And we had to renegotiate and restructure external debt. That was the beginning. When you start renegotiating external debt, then they also looked at the sustainability by the IMF. Then they saw you need to restructure not only external debt, restore debt sustainability, you need to restructure to a certain extent domestic debt as well. So that came in September 2022. As a result, we started the process. Now we have completed the debt restructuring of domestic debt completely. As I said, central bank made the biggest contribution. EPF made a small contribution. Now banking sector is stable. We have been able to maintain financial stability while bringing down domestic debt burden of the government. Already they are enjoying that low debt service payments from the government side, from the domestic debt. But external debt, we are in the process of, we have almost completed the negotiation of restructuring bilateral official debt, that is Japan, China, India. They are almost final. We will soon sign up the MOUs, which is a final stage. Once we sign up and agree to terms and conditions, what we are expecting. And third part is a commercial restructuring of what is called international sovereign bonds, so commercial debt with CDB and ISB holders. That is also we are in the final process of finalizing. Once we do that, the relief what we are expecting, instead of paying $6 billion per year, it will be almost half of that we are here to pay. That's why a lot of people are talking about we have not paid some of the external debt. Once we start paying, we will come back to the same situation. That is the main reason why we need to restructure. We don't want to come back to the same situation. That's why we restructure. We have a lower debt service payments going forward. For example, I'll give one example. Foreign currency debt service payments last year, if we did not restructure, we had 9% of GDP in terms of foreign currency debt service payments. The restructuring targeting to bring it down to below 4.5%. This half of what we are supposed to pay in next 10 years. That is the relief we are expecting. Even debt to GDP, we had 128% of GDP debt to GDP. So we want to bring it down to below 95% in next several years. So this is the reason why it's a medium to long term debt relief for the government. As a result, this will not come back as a debt crisis, and government can afford to meet all these debt service payment out of their income. That's why they need to record what they call primary surpluses, and also that's why we need to achieve higher economic growth So the capacity to pay would be much higher. Even current assessment, even if we grow at 3%, we will be achieving those targets under restructuring terms. But if we are able to grow above 3%, I am confident that we will be able to grow well above 3% going forward, which means government debt servicing capacity would be much easier than what we had in the last 10 years. That's the whole objective. So this is why I think a crucial next step is to complete the debt reduction process. Then obviously government will have a medium, long-term relief. Government will not go back to debt crisis if we complete the debt restructuring process according to target. Then next, any government, it will be easier for the government to manage their own expenditure, revenue, and invest in public infrastructure, all these things. There will be much more room, even as I said, increase salaries for the public service.
When you say complete debt restructuring process, how soon are we looking at this? You spoke about the MOUs that are to be signed with the creditor nations, and also about private debt. There are talks about a delay in private debt.
There has been usually in the process, if you look at it in the country like Zambia, the Ghana, all these countries, there's a sequencing process. So first part is usually domestic debt we have completed last year. Then second one, official creditors, we will be completing soon. The next last step is to complete commercial creditors, because the process is that once we agree to terms and conditions, others will have to fall in the same comparable terms and conditions. So once we agree with the official creditor nations, what they call official credit committee, once we announce, then all will be public. These are the terms and conditions. Then the balance part, official creditors also will have to come up with a solution which is comparable with what we agreed with the official creditors. That's the process. That's why this whole thing can't be done simultaneously, because there's a procedure process, a negotiation process. So we have to take one by one, first domestic debt, and then the official creditors, then final lap is the external. I'm confident that we should be able to complete. We have been following and negotiating and having discussion, making progress. I think this is, in my view, we are in the last lap of this completion.
Any time frame, Governor?
I don't think I should give any time frame. It is not appropriate, but I'm very confident we will be completing it very soon, all process.
What does this mean for the economy in the long term? We've seen the President talk about 2045, and then previously we spoke about 2025, which is just an year away. But with all this, Sri Lanka has had a lot of expectations to have been developed by 2025. I'm talking about maybe a decade or two ago. But now we're looking at 2045. Is there light at the end of the tunnel for Sri Lanka if we proceed on these policies?
Yeah, I think the first objective, the immediate one, was to recover stability. With the crisis, we saw inflation went to 70%, no reserves, government wouldn't be able to pay in this, all these issues. So first objective, as sooner the better, and that's what we have achieved, stability, stable macroeconomic conditions, and we have addressed immediate short-term needs. But still, it's not the full recovery, I have to admit that. So first stability, then the growth in the next step. So what you just mentioned, by 2025, I think, in my view, even before, pretty soon, we should be able to basically achieve the full stability. After completing debt restructuring, then next step is we would expect the rating agencies to improve our ratings, and then have more sustainable debt for next 10 years, not for 1 year, 2 years. Next step is to stabilize the government debt service payments for next 10 years. But by 2024, by end of this year, at least within pretty soon, as I mentioned earlier, should be a complete that part. So next part is to continuation of this kind of reforms, so that from 2025 onwards, even 2024, is going to be the first year after the crisis. We are going to report positive economic growth for the whole year. We have seen already 3 quarters of last 3 quarters, we saw positive economic growth. 5.4 in the Q1 of this year. So we need to continue that positive growth momentum. So that is the path of recovery. So medium to long term, we need to ensure country will be growing at least around 4 to 5%, so that we will have much better living conditions. We'll have much better ability for the government to provide services for the people. So that's how people's income can can be increased so that they can meet the high prices that already prevailing. The income should be going up. So for that process, short-term stability is already, I think, almost achieved. Next process is what I am talking about. I like to talk about next 10 years until 2032, at least under the program. Until 2032, government will not have a significant debt burden. There's sufficient time for the government of the country to implement sufficient reforms so that our capacity to grow, potential growth can be enhanced much. That's how people can benefit. So that's where next process should be focusing on country to increase their capacity. For example, a lot of other things like female labor force participation. Only 35% of female are in the workforce. Why can't they be 70%? They can contribute more to the economy. They can be, their incomes can be higher. So those are the medium to long term issues that we should now embark on, while preserving the short term gains and keeping those gains on the sustainable basis, and also enhance our ability to grow, enhance the ability for the people to increase their incomes. That's a medium to long term target. That's why we are in that direction. That's why it's important. I always say this is a very narrow path. We need to move in that path, and without falling into the pitfalls going forward, because it's a narrow path. We should ensure that we are moving in the right direction as we have done in the last 2 years. We need to continue and at a much more committed way in the same direction.
Beyond 2032, you mentioned what would be the debt
because
to GDP?
This debt to GDP, by the time we should be able to settle a lot of debt at a lower rate, and then our economy should be at a much higher stage. Our ability to borrow more or ability to service debt would be much higher even before 20. I mean, I don't think one should be difficult to predict for longer term, but still current program that will ensure this sustainability at least until 2032. So when you reach that target, you can have a new program how to go beyond that. That's, I don't think we should be, I mean, I'm not a person who is planning a very long term. First to address current issue and then go forward gradually one by one and then stabilize it.
You're quite optimistic, but you also warned against policy changes.
Yeah.
We'd like to talk about all that when we return after this short break here at Hyde Park. We are in conversation with the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe. Do stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are discussing Sri Lanka's economy and if the policy decisions will take Sri Lanka out of bankruptcy and the crisis situation. Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe, in May mentioned, warned actually against economic policy changes, cautioning that any potential changes to the current economic policy and deviation whatsoever from the existing policy framework could lead to a return to economic stagnation. Why did you say that? Were there any policy changes that you foresaw being taken?
No, this the statement I made on in the context of the key economic parameters. For example, now the government of country's commitment with the IMF for us to restore the sustainability for the economic growth. There are key parameters. One is, the key one is basically the government fiscal imbalance. This is the root cause of the economic crisis that we all understand. That without addressing root cause, we can't go anywhere else. This is where this is important going forward. The country has committed to maintain what they call fiscal balance, so primary surplus of the government without interest payment, government revenue and expenditure. Government should be able to generate the surplus in the revenue minus interest expenditure. Interest expenditure no one can control, it is the monetary policy. So government income and expenditure, if the government can generate a medium to long term over 2% of surplus in that account, that is necessary. So if any government in the future are planning to reverse that direction, obviously that will lead to another debt crisis. That's why it's important first part on the government side. Fiscal and debt sustainability is important. That's how we came into this crisis. That is paramount important for any future government to maintain fiscal discipline without promising things that you can't deliver, without having expenditure more than the revenue, other than interest expenditure, then that will create a crisis. That's the first important one. Relating to that is other one for the country, that's for the government. For the country's ability to earn foreign exchange as a country than what we spend as a country. That's what we call current account deficit or surplus of the Sri Lanka. So with the policies that we had, we were able to record for 2023 current account surplus, which means country was able to earn foreign exchange more than we spend in terms of current expenditure of foreign exchange. So exports, remittances, tourism, all these things taken together were higher than what we imported, what we paid out as expenditure. This was the first time for long years, full year current account surplus was recorded. Going forward, even this year, we are going to record same current account surplus. How economy has transformed into that is that even with short-term measures, we are able to, as a country, not with the government, country is a much broader perspective. Country has been able to earn more foreign exchange than we spend. That's how additional is built up as resource. When you earn more, that will stabilize the exchange rate, that will build more resource for us to use on a rainy day. That will create buffers for the government or for the country as a central bank to meet any external shock. The higher revenues for the government will create buffers for the government, so to meet any external or internal shock, for example, is a flood or something, government should have some buffer for them to spend in that kind of situation. That's why it's all about creating buffers for the government, creating buffers for the country in terms of foreign exchange earnings and foreign exchange savings of the country. That's why reserves and the current account surplus, ability to earn more than what has happened in the last several decades. We have been spending, as a country, spending more in terms of foreign exchange than we are earning. So we fill the gap with borrowings. Borrowings are good as long as those borrowings will generate future income, future foreign exchange income. So that did not happen. As a result, we continued to borrow, fill the gap, and we came into an unsustainable debt. So to address that, we need to transform the economy from the kind of a country that we borrowed and lived, and country that earn and live. Earn, generate surpluses, and then live. That is the most sustainable. That's why this transformation of one government is sustainable, fiscal sustainable, other countries foreign exchange earning capacity. In terms of, that's why we always call, historically we have been called import dependent country. But we had to be export foreign exchange earning country, export oriented economy. That transformation will have to happen not only by the government, but the private sector. Any businesses, any SME, any businesses, private sector should be focusing towards earning foreign exchange for the country so that they can spend. I mean, why we can't import motor vehicles now? Because we are not earning sufficient foreign exchange for us to spend. If we earn more in terms of foreign exchange, either way, the services, remittances, exports, anything, then we can allow people to import as much as what they want. So we can't do that is because we are not transforming the economy as a foreign exchange earning country. So we have to be a surplus country. We have to create buffers. You can't have all the time, but there could be certain years deficits, but that has to be recorded in the foreign year. For that to happen, the whole economy should be transformed into what they call export-oriented economy. That's the only way out in the medium long term. That reform will have to happen. Therefore, that reform to happen, we need to have several structural bottlenecks and problems will have to be addressed for us to promote. People, our industries, our services should be able to service globally.
Where do you think those changes and reforms should come from?
These are some of the reforms that, if you look at the reforms into the Board of Investment, reforms into doing business, reforms for facilitate people to earn more competitive businesses, do competitive businesses globally, not locally. Reduce the protection locally and make them more competitive globally, so that our people who, SMEs, anyone who produce anything, who produce goods or services, they should be able to sell that goods or services not only in Sri Lanka, anywhere in the world, they should be competitive enough that they should be able, therefore that we need to bring down the cost of production, cost of electricity, have to maintain low inflation, we have to reduce the cost of doing business. All these are the what I call medium to long term reforms. Once we stabilize the economy, next important step for any government is to work towards, those are not short term things, those will need to be committed reforms that will focusing on improving competitiveness of the economy, so that our businesses, our goods and services should be able to compete globally with new products, new markets. All these things will have to happen. And this is, I don't think there's a long list of things I have no time to do, but we discussed a lot about this.
Certainly. You mentioned about saving for a rainy day and how the current measures taken are looking at rebuilding the buffers. But Governor, do you think this concept is understood by authorities? Or I'm not going to talk politics, but have we understood this? Because we've really plunged into a deep crisis.
Oh, this is a very important point because it's all about general public understanding of these issues. So if they don't understand these are the important issues, then they could be misled by false promises. Okay, when we come, there's a short-term shortcuts and short-term measures, so you will get some short-term benefits. I don't think this is where it's important that media institutions like yours can contribute towards this public awareness and public knowledge of the real situation of the country and where we need to do real changes. So then people understand, people will support that. As long as if people don't understand these are the critical necessary reforms for medium to long term, they could be misled by different kind of things. Okay, so when we come that we will increase salaries by this amount, we'll give this thing, that thing, and because every time when you, the kind of belief is that every time when there's a new policy, new promise, always from the government side, one should ask, from where you are going to finance this? Tell us, okay, you will give this thing, that thing, but tell us if you are going to reduce taxes, how you fill that gap. Someone else should be paying that gap. Otherwise, you have to cut expenditure somewhere. So there's a balance between expenditure and revenue for the government. That is an important part when it comes to this kind of promises. But it is much broader than the government. It's the people's understanding of they need to be competitive in their production processes. They should be able to compete globally. They need to improve productivity of their businesses. They need to be much more efficient so that they can be competitive globally. That is not something government can do. That is something people's understanding, people who are doing businesses. I mean, this whole idea of entrepreneurship is that how competitive they can be. First part is if you look at locally, you're trying to be competitive locally. But if you are to be competitive globally, it's a different game. You must be able to bring in technology, bring in investment, and have practices that you can compete anywhere else in the world. That's what we see successful countries. I mean, that they have been able to compete and they are basically prospering.
Is that why we don't have such a large private sector that can support the economy? Of course, we have big players, but isolated.
Yeah, I think this is one of the structural issues. If you look at the big firms or even SMEs, a lot of businesses and production processes are trying to provide goods and services only for the local market. But they are not, I mean, this tourism is one thing. I mean, this is a global service. That is a low-hanging fruit. That's one easy area. But beyond that, any production of goods or services that if they can compete on locally, I think that's a very limited market. If they can compete globally, so sky is the limit. So that's where if you look at some of the successful sectors, for example, government sector, it's not something that is run by the government. It's they themselves are improved. Now one example is the tea also another factor, rubber is another factor. With these, some of the sectors have been able to compete globally. They are global players. They can sell their products to any other market at a competitive rates. That's how business should be, and why we don't see that much of I mean, if you look at our large small businesses are mainly catering to only for local people, local market. But that's a limit to where you can expand. That's where I think we need to support, have a creative, enabling environment for that kind of business to prosper and support that.
You said above 3% growth is possible for Sri Lanka if we implement these reforms. And you mentioned about manufacturing, export and services. What's really the edge for Sri Lanka if you are doing this? Is through your expertise of decades of service.
Yeah, I think on the growth rate, I think this conservative is, if you do right things, we can grow well above 4 to 5%. 3% is something even without doing much. I think we have capacity to grow. For example, India is growing last 3 years over 7%. So India is a country like, is much lower in terms of per capita, but still there's a potential. So this country like us has clearly a potential to grow about 4 to 5%. It's to facilitate this growth process. Then what are the opportunities? What are the services that we can compete globally? For example, if you look at our potential, is we have the geographical location Sri Lanka is located in a major sea road. So logistics services, port-related services, ports and airport services, and then tourism is a huge potential here. These are the sectors that can, for instance, even the production of goods and services. I don't think Sri Lanka is a country like we can compete with Bangladesh or Vietnam, that cheap labor country. We are not a country that can provide mass amount of cheap labor. We have to be much more kind of a technologically advanced products or services. There's a misperception that people talk about what they call Nishpadanarthika manufacturing economy is a myth to me. If you produce, you don't need to produce any physical good for the country to prosper. You need to produce either good or services depending on your capacity to grow. So here, in my view, Sri Lanka has the potential to compete more in the services sector than producing something like a garment or something. It's a product. It has to be high-end, technological, innovative, high-end products. That we have the advantage. Other than that, we have tourism, related services, given the location, given the close to the big markets, and access to all these free trade agreements will give more market access to all these countries. So with that, we have huge potential. So how to harness? So if you look at the sea resources, ocean resources, we are blessed with all the resources, but we are not basically utilizing all these things, given the advantage of the location and all the resources. So these are the areas that we have potential, obviously, that we, and also domestic, the mineral and all these resources that we have. But we need to explore. No point of having all these resources under the earth. You should be able to get that out and add value and export and earn foreign exchange.
Governor, I just have a couple of minutes, but so much to discuss. I'd like to ask a few questions in one go. 7th of April 2022, you took over as Governor of the Central Bank, 17th Governor at the height of the crisis when we plunged into depths of you don't like to call it bankruptcy. You say we announced a debt standstill.
Yes.
Again, now the government is coming up with an economic transformation bill, announcing as a law the targets set out by the IMF. Elections are around the corner. How does this economic stability and continuing our image internationally, working with creditors and ensuring that the economy prospers as optimistic as you are amid these elections? What's your message finally?
No, I think the economic transformation bill and other reforms that is not central bank. I think it's the government. I have to recognize and appreciate the role played by the government in terms of fiscal policy and economic reforms. All these things were done by the government. So in that process, I think the whole idea of economic transformation bill is to basically inbuild some of the targets that we have committed ourselves with the IMF in the medium to long term. It built into a kind of legislation, so that going forward, any administration coming in the future, so we'll have a kind of commitment to go in the same direction. They obviously, any elected government as a sovereign elected by people have the right to change any law. They think if that is not suitable, obviously they have the right to change through the legislation. But still, given the framework that has worked well so far, and looking at what are the reforms that those are needed going forward, as I mentioned, the Productivity Commission, International Trade Office, there are a lot of other things, Productivity Commission, all these things are in that bill in addition to some of the targets government has already committed. So it is just to ensure continuity of the policy in the same direction. Obviously, any government in the future, they want to change, even current government if they are elected, any government should have the right to revise reform in the right direction. But my clear message is that overall macro framework, as I said, revenue, fiscal and external sector monetary policy, that framework should be protected, should be preserved without deviating from this key overall macro principles, while engaging and promoting other growth-oriented reforms, so that our ability to grow of the country can be enhanced, not only 3% but 4 to 5%, so that people's living standard would be much higher the faster that we implement those reforms. That's why it's important to move in the same direction going forward.
Thank you very much, Governor, for taking the time to clarify matters that have arisen in society, in Parliament, and to talk about the economic reforms and the central bank obligations to the public.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We were in discussion with the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe, who has also served as an alternate Executive Director of the IMF for India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Bhutan back in 2010 and 2012, served as the Director of the Board of Management of the Sustainability Energy Authority and the Board of Investment, and in charge of negotiating financial services in bilateral trade and services agreements with China and Singapore, and a career central banker who took office on the 7th of April 2022 as the 17th Governor of Sri Lanka. We'll see you again next week at the same time with yet another discussion. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.